Hello, I'm Hat, and welcome to Anecdote Thursday here on All Hat No Cattle. Today's story comes from my time in San Antonio when I lived there with my first wife, and an interesting event which occurred outside of my church, even though it was billed as a Catholic church event, and also outside of my comfort zone, but I participated anyway. The title of today's episode is Lay Your Hands on Me, once a popular song. I'll link to a video in the description. And with that said, let's get to it. This anecdote occurred when I was living with my first wife down in San Antonio. She had been working in a small town outside of Corpus Christi for some time, and we would go there on occasion for church and family gatherings and things like that. It turned out she belonged to an evangelical Catholic church, which is something I had never heard of, which really surprised me since I grew up a Catholic. We actually went to a weekend retreat with this Catholic church spinoff, and my eyes were opened as to just how out there any group can get. And unfortunately for me, Catholicism was no exception. The only part of the weekend I have any real memory of was the faith healing session. Now, again, I'm a Catholic. Catholics don't do faith healing, but here we go again. Now, I have had hip problems basically all of my life. I was born with a congenital hip disease, and they would bother me if I walked for any more than a short distance. It had happened to be a long walk from the parking lot to the auditorium where this was being held, and I was standing in the pew for most of the I almost said ceremony. It definitely was not a ceremony. It was a sideshow. So as the faith healing started, the people were walking up on stage. The priest, like he was a priest, would stand there and yell into the ether about curing this person. He would then lay his hands on the afflicted area, and I don't remember if he shouted "pow" or "be gone" or anything like that, but he had the same effect because people would keel over backwards, being caught by a couple of stagehands, and then helped over to the exit stairs. My wife, my wife could talk me into anything, and she talked me into going up on that stage. Now, I did not believe in faith healing. I was still religious, but there were certain lines I would not cross, and this was one of them. But love conquers all, especially reason, so I acquiesced. Once it was my turn, I got a front row seat as to what exactly was going on, and I realized it's all basically self-hypnosis. He's gibbering away, and you let your mind go, and the next thing you know, you're kind of floating. He puts his hands on your hips, they're warm, and pressure often relieves pain, as it did in this case. So for a second, it was like getting a mini hip massage, and my hips felt better. Then he put his hand on my forehead and yelled, "Pow," or "whack," or whatever, and I realized that was my cue to fall backwards. I did not need to fall backwards, but I felt it was part of the show, and I had to do my part. So I fell backwards. They caught me, and I dragged my ass off the stage. And everyone was like, "Oh, how did they feel? How did they feel?" Well, they feel better. "Oh, hallelujah. Oh, praise Jesus. Oh, my gosh, that's great. Pray to the Virgin Mary. Here we go." Half hour later, my hips felt like shit. And I told my wife, and she said, "Well, you know what I'm going to say." She said, "Well, maybe you just didn't believe in it enough." Yeah, fuck you. That day was my exit route from the Catholic Church altogether. So I guess I owe my ex a bit of thanks for something. And there you have it. Now, this wasn't my only exposure to the evangelical Catholic Church. Later on, when I moved out of Texas back to the north, my mom fell in with this kind of a crowd. A very charismatic young priest was leading them in these, frankly, bizarre ceremonies. And the thing that really got me was my mother felt that she could speak in tongues, completely against Catholic teaching. She would sit out by the river in her chair, have the Bible in one hand, a glass of water resting on the chair's little table, and she would start lolling off into space. Scared the hell out of me and my dad. Ultimately, that little church was shut down by our local diocese, and the parishioners were scattered to the wind, as it were. Well, that'll wrap up this Anecdote Thursday. Thank you for stopping by, of course, and feel free to like and subscribe. Until I see you again, be well, and as always, thank you for your attention.